The first time I ever heard the word, he was talking about fixing his car, and the guy says that has to need just rewiring, and that's the. Hey, give me a piece of tin foil, and I'll put it together. Hell, I'm a Chicano mechanic, and I go, wow, Chicano mechanic, they can do stuff. They can, get stuff done, and they cut through the bullshit. Okay, I want to be a Chicano too. From that day forward, I call myself a Chicano.
I cannot deny that I wake up brown and I go to bed brown.
It's very easy to say that Mexicans are sleeping Mexicans or gangbangers or housekeepers or gardeners or farm workers, and that's all they are. But Chicanos are a lot of things.
We weren't Mexican. We weren't American. We were in between.
It becomes this ton of bricks on your shoulders.
It was kind of derogatory term.
Just communicating this visual imagery that we grew up with.
I was an artist, but I was going to be a Chicano artist.
But everybody thought about it because of our social circumstance, because of our economic status. They said, oh, that's peasant work.
And this fight is constantly evolving.
Calligraphy was graffiti. Sculpture was lowriding.
A Chicano was a Chicano, a Mexicano was a Mexicano, a Japanese, and all are more.
Being Chicano is like being proud of that, as opposed to try to distance yourself as much as possible.
I want other Chicanos to recognize themselves in the artwork and feel proud of our culture.
We need to be counted.
Chicano to me defines my Americanism.
If America's composed of immigrants, then this is the ultimate American school of art.
You know, my grandmother's from Tarahumara Indian. Tarahumara go back and forth across the border and always have. That border didn't exist there. Like they say, we didn't cross the border crossed us, because our tribe was from both sides.
It was just like an unspoken understanding that you were supposed to forget who you were and blend in. And whatever you lived in your house, whatever went in your house was irrelevant. And all that stuff that you learned in Mexico was irrelevant, had nothing to do with it.
My fathers and my uncles and my aunts, when they had only Thursday nights to go out in downtown Los Angeles, because that's the only night that the Chicanos were allowed to go to the theaters or to the dance clubs openly. The rest of the week it was all segregated.
What would happen if you went on a Friday or a Saturday?
You'd get turned away, and in many instances beat up. Sad to say.
My experiences in the entertainment industry and movies and TV is that, they are surprised you speak English, and you just look at them and say, I was the same influence as you, dude. I grew up in Los Angeles, the first generation to have TV and everything that was on TV I was influenced by. I went to school, I went to college, I probably did better than you. And I know all these influences, and also I speak Spanish and you speak just English. So it's like, it's almost like they talk in front of you, like you don't understand what they're speaking. So you grow up with that kind of, it's like the gardener speaks English. We've been speaking in front of him all the time,
And to be a Chicano was like, this is where we come from. Because part of the Chicano movement was to really embrace our Mexicanada, okay?
So when you hear about Chicanos in the news, and you hear them like yelling brown power or brown pride, you're like, it's an identity. You say, hey, wait a minute, it's what I am matters, or where I came from matters.
The Chicano moratorium is the most important day in the history of East LA, and that's when the alarm clock went off and the community woke up. It was a peaceful demonstration, August 29th, 1970. And by the time it got to Laguna Park, the sheriffs joined the party.
And throwing tear gas. I saw a bus full of old ladies, senior citizens, tear gas just roll right into the bus. All the windows were down.
And trying to get home was almost it was impossible. I couldn't get home because there was people thrown in the streets because they were running, screaming with tear gas in their eyes. My mom said they were jumping the fence and they were all over her yard. It was like mass hysteria.
I was there on the boulevard when all the stuff was on fire, and you know.
Yeah, I remember growing up, seeing the Watts riots in '65 on TV. And
right.
Like, wow, that was scary. But this was in our own backyard.
3 people were killed. One specific guy was Ruben Salazar, who was a columnist, editorialist for the LA Times. He was like the Chicano voice.
And he was one of the first ones to talk about Chicano, what was Chicano, and what things were lacking in the community.
The sheriff shot him as he sat in a bar on Whittier Boulevard. Anyway, that episode changed East LA forever.
After that, it seemed like a spin-off of all the young people who all like college students. I mean, you had a lot of them went to become lawyers. A lot of them went to be teachers. A lot of them went to be artists. So it's like you had a promise to yourself. You had to do something positive for the community.
Instead of picking up a rifle, we'll play guitars and play music. And we thought that was a good message.
So it kind of gave me a little, made me a little bold, you know. So that I even put like a little Mexican flag on my windbreaker in 8th grade.
I mean, some things are better and some things are not. And I think it's better that we can actually talk about the impact of it is being a Chicano. I mean, before that was a bad word.
When I was in first grade, I went to Trinity Street School. We had taken a trip to the Grand Central Market, and we were asked to kind of draw our things we saw and our experiences. And I drew this big squash. I remember the squashes were big, and it was like huge. It was like 3 times bigger than any of the kids. And the teacher looked at it and said, "Well, you'll never be an artist." And it was like, oh, just crushing. I didn't know it was, art or drawing or something you could learn to do. And so at that point, I didn't develop any art, but I always liked art. So I started being conversant with the Impressionists. I used to take out all the portfolios every weekend and just study them. I read the history, but I look at the pictures. Oh, is that what a Cézanne looks like? It was mostly because I wanted to be sophisticated. When I finally got some money to start collecting art, and eventually I discovered these Chicano painters in the early 80s. And not only did the images resonate with me, that this is part of my upbringing, this is something I know, but I also appreciated it on a painting level. I knew at this point what good painting was. And then I came to the conclusion they're all kind of painting about the Chicano experience, what it meant to them to be a Chicano, and they had different routes. What they were talking about was the same. So what bound them together as a school was this common experience of being Chicano in a variety of methods that they expressed it.
Cheech has changed the understanding of art by Chicanos and exposed the art to people around the country in a way that no one has ever done it. In my mind, museums prior to Cheech's involvement had never paid much attention to art by Chicanos.
And that is an enormous service that, absent Cheech's commitment and passion for this work, it might have been another 15, 20 years before museums began to collect and take this work as seriously as they should have 30 years ago.
And it has to change, it's time, and maybe now because minorities are shifting and majorities are changing, that it's naturally going to take care of itself that way.
I'm super flattered with the fact that Cheech bought my work, because I see this work, as well as the pieces in the show, that is the Chicano exhibition, as being somewhat both humanistic and humorous at the same time, And I think that somehow Cheech broaches the subject in a similar fashion.
Matter of fact, he called me on my cell. I don't have movie stars calling me, so he calls me and I don't recognize him, and I said, "Who is this?" This is Cheech, man. And I was down in the Union Station, Cheech, and everybody turns around. So he says, "Hey, well, okay, let's come to my house." I says, "Okay."
And then they said, "Do you want to deliver it?" So I don't know if they were being kind or they were saying, oh, we don't want to deliver it. you deliver it, you know. So that's exactly what I did and drove on out there, and Cat acted like we were old pals from way back.
It's wonderful, and you know, we have to really thank Cheech for his patronage and his loyalty. You know, the fact is, all of us have made a few dollars off of his movie career. Up in smoke. Carlos was the first Chicano star.
For me, the person who captures the essence of Los Angeles is Carlos Almaraz in his freeway crashes. The explosions of some of these pieces like Purple Sunset. I mean, if you lived through, you know, the Watts riots, the riots of 1992, those kinds of things, imagine those things. When we think of the civil rights struggle and riots from the 60s, which riots do we think of? The ones here in Los Angeles. And I remember driving around and seeing the whole city aflame, not unlike Carlos's piece.
I think he had something like 25 tickets for driving in LA one year, and gave up and went to New York because he couldn't take it anymore.
By the time he came back, there was all of this activity in terms of the Chicano movement, and yet he just threw himself into it, became very good friends with Cesar Chavez, did a lot of the portable murals that were used for a lot of the farm workers conventions.
He did 5 years in the trenches with the United Farm Workers, painting massive murals that weren't intended to sell, but just to promote the concept of unionism. So when he came back to LA, it was sort of like the most consummate painter all of a sudden decided, I'm going to start working for myself and doing work that's more personal.
This guy, I really admired his work and the way he thought. He had really good conversations. And, you know, and I was his pretty good friend for a while until he got married.
I think he's at the apex. Yeah. I think he's the biggest influential painter in the whole grouping of Chicano painters that I've ever seen.
I thought he's probably the best painter there is. Much better than Grumpy, much better than anybody, including myself. He's just a damn good painter.
This is a 1985 painting by Carlos Almaraz, which has a number of the motifs that he has usually used in there. Little hidden figures, little rabbit figure here and there, the wonderful trees. And I think the influence here has to do also with the fact that he spent a lot of time in Hawaii the last 5 years or so of his life.
He is buried on Kauai. Carlos is very famous actually for the work he did, the pastels he did in Hawaii. They're beautiful. Yeah. And I don't think there's ever been an exhibition of them in LA, and there should be. I'm going to put it together. It's a really nice idea, and people should see them. You know, I miss Carlos, but I'm still angry at him for kicking the bucket, you know. I sort of decided that we were both going to live to be 80 or 90 years old and, you know, discussing art, and I miss him a great deal.
Yeah, there was a school. I mean, there's a school of photorealists from the 70s, and I always wanted to be a realist, so when I was in school, we would draw models. And for me, I was good at it, but it took forever. So I started to use photography. I get little pieces of things, and I try to make it look like one place at one time. And make the meaning universal. This area makes it more universal. And you're right, these are from actual fights.
I mean, my favorite's John Valadez. You know, I just think because, well, I like the subject matter, but then I like the way it's portrayed too. It's kind of the realist kind of you know, and it you know, the technique. I mean, it's heavy duty, man, and for me, it touches home. You know, I grew up in East LA, I grew up in Boyle Heights, and the scenes are just scenes that I've seen, and so I think that's why it resonates to me. But technically, it's incredible.
That part of me that wants to get the work out is really a hard dude. And that's what keeps me interested in my work. Because there's a part of me that looks at it later, in the morning mostly, when I wake up, like, wow, that's decent. But the guy that's working on it, he's that angry dude that, like, I'll show you.
For an artist like John Valadez not to have been shown in New York is a huge oversight on the part of New York museums, which eventually they will address. I mean, he's just too damn good. And then I realize that we don't own a work of his, which is profoundly embarrassing that we don't own Valadez's work, and we're gonna correct that oversight in the coming seasons.
The ironic thing, which I think about the piece, is that the piece is called Car Show, but you hardly see the cars, okay? So that's what I used to see.
I mean, all summer I've been staring at this pink butt of this woman and thinking I'm a pervert. And then I realized, formally he's organized the canvas so you can do nothing other than stare at that pink focal point.
It's hard to explain, but I always like to see between the corners. I always saw beauty in the places that you don't want to look at, what we look through. They remind me of when I was a kid, the people that I used to see, the working class people, weren't very attractive. Most people looked through them, but I found something that I wanted to, I want people to remember. So there,
In traditional Cholo graffiti, we only tag our neighborhood, staking out your name. This is who we are, this is who we represent, and this is our strength. It comes from tradition, comes from the 1940s. They started writing the graffiti with the most prestigious typeface. It would be the same typeface from the Constitution of the United States. Cholo graffiti is Old English, only in capital letters and only done in black and white.
He is known by all these different generations. He's known by these artists because of his mainstream kinds of visibility in terms of being in exhibitions in major museums. And then you go out and then you see young people who are taggers or just people who do graffiti art, and they know him too.
It has a lot of meaning for graffiti guys. By writing your name and by doing production, it not only describes ourselves, but it keeps us alive. It describes who we really are right now.
A lot of my paintings are based on my emotional state.
She will probably be, at the end of the day, the best-known Chicana artist.
Everything is alive and moving. Everything's vibrating and has motion and a life of its own. I decided I wanted to have my paintings look alive, and I wanted to imbue them with motion.
As a painter, I think what's really unique is animating the furniture, the walls, the windows. I think her work's extremely important. That part of life that goes alongside of the more public and more political face that's often given through Chicano art.
Hey, Tamara, ready to go. I think blues are the colors of our raza because we live in the shadows of the American dream. Yeah, I worked as a migrant worker. Up until I was 9, that was the only life I knew. And the integrity of the people that I worked with was the most beautiful thing I have ever experienced in American life. They had the most brutal work set before them. Not to buy a brand new car or a fur coat, but just to put beans on the table for their families. And they handled it with such beauty and such elegance and grace that I've carried it to this day in my arte. I've been criticized many times for glorifying gang violence. I guess they want me to paint a vase of flowers and present it to them as this is my life, Art doesn't work that way. Art is, if art is not about truth, then it is worthless. The reason there was so much drama in my work is because there's a lot of drama in the barrios. A few years ago, a friend of mine brought me a painting that he wanted me to repair that had AK bullet holes on it, which I did. I repaired it because I needed money to buy art supplies. I worked on a film called Blood In, Blood Out, directed by Taylor Hackford. It was about gang violence, and it sort of like kept me up at night. It was kind of traumatic. After I did that work, I felt so free that I did this piece called Estrella que Cae. And it's a guy out in the open woods. There's no urban sprawl. It's just like a feeling of freedom. This interview is over with Tamara Hernandez. Adios.
It's all cathartic. It's all relates back to times that I had right after the Vietnam War, and I found that painting was a release, a lot of these emotions and stuff. There are some bright spots and a lot of dark spots, and sometimes I'm saying, what the hell am I doing this for?
And what he does is he chronicles East Los Angeles. Just like the Impressionist painters, some of them chronicle Montmartre or different parts of Paris or the Seine or wherever they were. He paints pictures of the neighborhoods in East LA that are instantly recognizable.
This Madonna thing, I just thought it'd be funny to put a mask on the baby and on her. They leave this world without really knowing each other. And that's, a lot of people live their lives that way. There's that word mendacity that Tennessee Williams uses about not telling the truth or about not revealing the truth. And there's a lot of stuff in Mexico that's never revealed in politics, in culture, in a person's home. There's always these little dark secrets.
I think women like being sensual, sexy, pretty, provocative, even erotic. It's like this for me. Your handwriting has a heartbeat. It has your pulse. And the way you feel, the way you see the world is connected to your hand, to your heart, to that heartbeat, in the way in which you apply the paint, in the way in which you sing, in which you walk, in which you talk. That rhythm is present, and it's the rhythm of your life, the beating of your drum.
Tirando rollo, which translations would be communicating.
Tirando rollo is probably the most emotional painting for me in the whole show, because what it expresses this thing that I've been trying to get over, is that don't judge a book by its cover, which is, here is a girl that you might be afraid of if you saw her on the street, a little tough gang chick, and she's expressing this, I love you. Oh, it's just, every time I think about it, it's really brings emotion to me, because it's such a pure expression of changing perceptions.
It is a means of communicating with the inmates in the El Paso County Jail. Wives, girlfriends, relatives, or friends stand on the street using sign language to send messages to those inside the jail complex.
I had been doing a lot of paintings dealing with political issues and the treatment of Chicanos in East LA.
Paleteros are ice cream men. And with the little trucks, and they sell ice cream and they sell cotton candy.
They were being harassed by the police.
And the area is very dangerous. There's a lot of drugs, prostitution. And so in the midst of all that, the police chose to clamp down and with their riot squads, shut down the ice cream men. Which it really points up the irony and the kind of inherent racism of that, the police community especially, and their focus is wrong here.
When Carlos introduced me to Gilbert Lujan, he was drawing cars.
I do it because I'm interested in car culture, and Frank does it because he was interested in toys originally.
I liked what he had to say about cars and being an art form, and I started painting cars, and I got very much involved in the cult of the 38, 39 Chevy.
But in both of our cases, it's very sensual forms.
The cars in that era, the 30s and 40s, were much softer and round and more feminine.
I do headlights, Frank does breasts.
And they customize them and they lower them and all chop them down and paint them and wax them and love them, and it's just, to me, fascinating, because it's what you do with a sculpture. And I'm looking for the next generation, and I teach at Self-Help or Plaza de la Raza. I have them make something and paint it that day, and they get to take it home the second week. When I meet really interesting people, I invite them in the studio and give them a scholarship, and you say, come work with us. And I have a 5,000 square foot studio at this location, and 1,000 square feet is devoted to gallery space. And I'm having a Chicano art show, and really half of it is always young people. Gilbert and I had a lot of discussions about this. that's Chicano art. It's a reflection of the life in your community and you know, reflected through the art process. And you know, that's been my life for 30 years. So.
Gilbert Lujan, who in the early days was, you know, someone who I think was one of the key people in terms of the iconography that was later then promoted as part of Los Four. I mean, a lot of it came from him and his belief in not looking at Chicanismo only through the lenses of the political ideology, but more on a cultural level.
The Los Four group, there was Carlos Almaraz, Magu, Frank Romero, and Humberto de la Rocha.
I was in Magu's house one time and he gave me a piece of red paper. You know, because he's big on challenging yourself and always trying to get out of what you do every day that works for you. So he says, use other color, use clay.
This guy saw me looking at a painting, and I'd come up close to it and then back up to see the detail. And so he made fun of me. And I didn't want to be Magu, some cartoon character. And so I became a cartoon character anyway.
And I think a lot of times people, you know, look at Almaraz's work or even Frank Romero's work, and if you go back far enough, you see the source, and it's Magu. And a lot of times he doesn't get that kind of recognition.
He's the Aesop of the group. His images are very kind of cartoony, very anthropomorphic.
I was trying to find an icon that would represent me as a Chicano artist. So the Mexican pyramid is Mexican Indian. So I took some of these shapes and I inverted one, and it looked like a dog that was howling. So I invented the idea of a pyramid dog.
But they stand in for greater themes, you know, that he uses them to illustrate.
And you know, the rabbit ears thing is a little bit of a jokester kind of thing that is in alignment with our myths about the trickster coyote. So the implications that I draw from for the dog are complicated and many.
He's got a great sense of humor in his work, you know. The guys are always behind each other going, hey, you know. And he just busts your chops, but in a real kind of playful, humorous way.
And if people think that kids do it, all the better, because I can get away with more.
George Yepes. George Yepes and I started in el Centro de Arte Público with Carlos, Frank Romero, John Valadez, Leo Limon. So it was a collective of artists.
I went to a gallery in West LA, or Santa Monica. Robert Berman was showing them, and that's when I first bought the first piece. There was this Amor Matizado.
He really delves more into the women in Madonna. I think that's where his, again, you know, sort of interesting religious sense, a lot of the work, especially women, for George. You know, what can I say? He's a ladies' man. He loves women, so I think that's his vice. But he definitely paints them all in a very beautiful, romantic aspect.
Yeah, I have two pieces in the Chicano Vision show. One is a oil painting on linen. It's about the Russian invasion of the Reichstag in Berlin, and also about Tanya, who was a Russian guerrilla fighter against the Nazis, whom was captured by the Nazis and whose neck was tied to the back end of a vehicle, and they dragged her through the snow until she died.
He did a series of very iconic posters that were you know, the face of the Chicano movement during that period. And that when he went off into his own private, personal painting concerns or themes, I think he was more influenced by Bay Area art.
The other one is work on paper. The image is about Mexico, my connection to Mexico, my family, and the complex baggage of both my memory of Mexico through my family and also visiting my family there, and my embracing of the Virgen de Guadalupe and my love of flowers.
Ester Hernandez is from the Bay Area, and she's great. But she was there again, like Rupert Garcia, out of that group of San Francisco Bay artists who were very political. So most of her early work, it was poster work.
And she very much got interested in being part of the farm worker movement early on.
She paints, you know, iconic figures like Astrid Haddad, who is a Mexican performance artist. She's best known for that really iconic poster she did of Sun Mad Raisins. It was a takeoff on sun-made raisins, when they were arguing about pesticides.
When she does something, what she wants to say, that message is just as important as how to say it, and that it becomes so intertwined that you can't really separate the two.
He represents this new wave of Chicano artists that are influenced by their version of pop culture. And he depicts a lot of gang life, barrio gang life, but in this kind of electric, exaggerated style. We reproduced La Lechuza. It's just a myth, like La Llorona. It's the Mexican boogeyman. And La Lechuza, with this owl woman that you never, just heard the stories about, will come and get these bad kids.
Ever since I painted this piece, I've heard so many different Lechuza stories, that it's really incredible that they're there, people know the story and they can understand these signs,
The beautiful thing about that is that I'm sharing a lot of these stories with Chicanos from California. And I find that connection with these artists, and it's just so amazing how we live halfway across the nation, but yet we share these similar stories.
And that's what I wanted to try to do with this piece, is have people kind of really stop and read into the image and try to decipher all these different messages that are passed on in these legends that we grew up with.
One brush, one little sable hair brush, the whole painting. And wow, you got a lot of cup of coffee or something else to do that, man.
The wedding photos at Hollenbeck Park. I actually was there. I mean, I went all the way around the park taking pictures, and there was a wedding going on. And I sort of made up the composition a bit, but it was from something I saw live happening at the park. I chose the setting and then just created a little story, a vignette.
I knew David from kindergarten to the 4th grade.
We did our first mural in the 3rd grade.
4th grade, he moved away.
Humphreys Avenue School. We were commissioned by our teacher to dress up the classroom for open house. And she rolled out butcher paper on the side of the blackboard, and we went at it.
And the reason he moved away, because the Long Beach freeway came through his house.
Cut my home out of the picture.
And it was like, hey, you gotta move. Okay, we'll move.
We were at a show, a Chicano art show in Venice, which was kind of a historical event.
And so I saw Wayne. He didn't recognize me because I had my big old bushy hair and a beard and my glasses. So it took a while to convince him that he knew me. I said, I'm an artist, and he said, he's an artist. Wow, so that's, everything we said got us closer and closer together.
We described each other's mural and said, oh, that's my fave. He said my mural was his favorite in Ramona Garden, and I said his mural was my favorite in Estrada Court.
He and Wayne Healy are the two people that started East Los Streetscapers, which were one of the very first of the muralist groups that formed collectives.
Well, I grew up in Boyle Heights in East LA. It's one of the oldest communities, first communities outside of the Pueblo. Brooklyn and Soto. Today, Brooklyn is now Cesar Chavez Avenue. I lived in like one block area for all my school, from grammar school to junior high school to high school.
I'd seen his work all the time growing up, especially the mural they did on the corner of Soto and Cesar Chavez, and right along the Payless shoe store wall.
Right across the street from King Taco.
Yeah, you know it.
That's right.
They got Paul Botello on one corner, they got them on another, they got a bunch of people. But he was really, really cool and mellow, and having that impression of his mural for many years and then meeting him was interesting because he was really different than what I imagined. But he was really mellow, really cool, and we had a great time.
Folk painting meets Jackson Pollock. He discovered this drip method where he paints this kind of two-dimensional painting, and then he stands over with like a ketchup bottle with paint in it and drips. You know how good you have to be to do that? You can't go back. Raul Guerrero is a real good-looking guy from San Diego. Looks like Pancho Gonzalez, the tennis player. He's very kind of, matinee handsome. He's gone through a lot of different interpretations of what he's trying to do and a lot of different themes. But the ones I really resonate with are his Tijuana series, where he, growing up in San Diego, it's basically like growing up in Tijuana. It's like a couple blocks away. And that bar scene, it's very kind of, I mean, for me, he's like Degas or Toulouse-Lautrec.
When I was a teenager, the rite of passage, you might say, was for all the teenagers to go down to Tijuana and hang out.
They went into the same bars, with the Can or the strip bars of their day.
It occurred to me that Tijuana really was something of an iconic place, especially that red light district in the northern part of the city. What I found interesting was that around 3 or 4 in the morning, when everybody is completely bombed, the women in the clubs, who generally walk around with a breast exposed, and these guys just start clinging. But that's part of the deal. That as in the process of they coming on to the women, another woman will be picking their pocket. It happens very quickly, boom, like that. I felt that that for the women it was a form of poetic justice for them to pick their pockets and capitalize on the men that were capitalizing on them, you might say.
They call the pieces portraits, but I'm kind of hoping that I can go beyond just a physical likeness of an individual. I want to do images that say something about the life experience. I'll have like a small moment of experience with these individuals, and I kind of want to capture that. Sometimes there's special moments that come along in life. It doesn't happen very often, and I think it becomes kind of special. I asked her, give me something of who you feel that you are. When people look at it, they go, oh, it's so realistic, and that's nice when they say that, but I'm hoping that it goes deeper than that, that hopefully, I don't know, you can feel a presence from that particular individual. That's kind of what I'm trying to do. And I'm still trying to find a way to take that another step further.
He was one of the original guys who used a great sense of ironic sophistication in order to expose attitudes. He had those paintings, Kitchen Spanish and The Show of Hands, which is one of my favorite paintings. He has a great sense of humor and a great sense of what is appropriate and what can cut straight to the center of the argument. And he went off, okay, I've done my political stuff, and I have several of the paintings he's done since then. A lot of painters get to the point where this is what I do best, and they keep reproducing that. He keeps moving through stuff, and I really appreciate that. He brings his artistic sense to every phase that he does.
Most of my work is based on my memories and my recollections of growing up in Kingsville. I remember details, and I remember a lot in color. I saw a bunch of people standing in front of a church waiting, and I realized very quickly that it was a quinceañera celebration.
What I didn't realize that behind me in a slow and low car came the girl, the quinceañera, with her parents and her escort in a lowrider car. And everybody's waiting for her to arrive to go into the special mass.
Our culture, our history, our customs, our traditions, our food, our language, everything that is in our lives, I want people to see that. It's also been very important for me to do this work because other people who are not familiar with the Mexican American culture can see familiarity in it, can recognize some things in it that are similar to their lives. And if they see that familiarity, then there's less of a chance of misunderstanding, less of a chance for discrimination and racism.
There was and still is a lot of discrimination because of one's skin color. And so I was sort of doing a number with that. I was kind of like throwing a curveball. Okay, these guys are Chicanos, but they're not brown. They're green, they're purple, they're red, they're blue. And it was kind of like acknowledging a political notion about discrimination, but at the same time neutralizing it, fighting back with colors.
But yet, I think more than that, there's a loneliness in these pieces, and I wonder is that loneliness there because you're searching, you know, that you're not sure, or that there's just a lot of confusion kind of between those cross cultures, you know, what you should do, what you should be, how you should behave, especially for men.
Porque Le Gustan las Mujeres is based on a neighborhood character from way back home in Laredo, Texas when I was a kid. This man was a very big man, he was a mechanic, and it occurred to me that I could make a statement about macho attitudes towards women, and that became the piece, Hombre que le gustan las mujeres.
The one thing I really remember is it humbles you. You know, you're talking to these artists, and in some ways you have this respect and awe for them as producers of work. And I was asking if she could send slides, and said, "Well, honey, you may have to give me a week or two because I work as a waitress, and I'm not going to have enough time."
She does kind of modern, sophisticated retablos, and they incorporate a lot of images. The one that's in the show is La Danza, which was the dance of her family trying to survive.
And it has all kinds of symbols, such as the house where I was born.
You see Cezanne, you see Mexican folk art.
I use a lot of metal for the sake of my attraction to retablos, which are the Mexican prayer paintings, and it's more contemporary approach to the narrative. Because I like to tell the story, but I also like working on the surface, so scraping the paint and adding layers is an important factor to my art making.
It's about a woman kicking back after work, the wife, and she's got a cigarette, she's just thinking about things in life. And then on the top, it's the tic-tac-toe game that she's playing with me, the kids, with life, grandma, grandpa, everybody. It's a tic-tac-toe game of life. I also incorporate the ancient ball games from Mexico known as poc-tapoc, the give and take that was part of what that games were about back then, and how now, today, it's just as relevant.
Part of this whole thing that I'm doing here, I'm really trying to attract taggers who are out there trying to express themselves. And now I've created an image for the taggers. They're not really brush and paint kind of guys.
Jesse Trevino is one of the seminal San Antonio artists in that he was the first one to, in a photorealistic technique, portray people of the neighborhood. And the interesting thing about Jesse is that he was a Vietnam vet, and he was right-handed, and when he went to the war, he got his right hand blown off. And so when he came back, he had to learn how to paint left-handed. And he's a photorealistic painter. His real focus is what he chooses to depict in his art, which is the glorification of his own neighborhoods and the people in his own neighborhoods. They're worthy of attention.
Of course, I was drafted while I was in New York, going to art school, and ended up in Vietnam. And you know, that's when everything changed. I couldn't use my right hand. I couldn't use my painting hand anymore. Spent 2 years in the hospital. Didn't know what I was going to do. So it was a tragic thing that happened to me. But yet, you know, as an artist, I started seeing things very, very differently.
One of the paintings that I find very moving is Jesse Trevino's painting of the cotton pickers. It was commissioned by a man named Juan Vasquez. He's the Honorable Juan Vasquez. His grandfather was a cotton picker in Texas. There were many Mexican-American cotton pickers, and his grandfather was one of them, and he was one of them. So it's this amazing painting, which is formally beautiful with the recessional space of the rows of cotton going back to the horizon. I think it's such a dignified image of labor and of generational succession. And yes, it's corny, but I love the fact that this cotton picker's grandson is now a federal judge. I mean, that's the myth of the American dream.
Vincent Valdez is the bright new hope, man. He's the whiz kid. He's the kid that gets drafted out of high school and becomes a star in the NBA.
I remember sitting in the computer lab and thinking like, man, what a story and what a powerful story and what an injustice. And everybody should know about this story. And so I titled it Kill the Pacheco Bastard because that's what the 200 servicemen were chanting as they marched into the barrios with chains, with clubs, with fists, and they stripped them of their clothes because they took great pride in their clothes and the way they looked and the way they dressed, and they were sharp. Not only did you have to be a zoot suiter, but if you were just flat out Mexican, you were a threat and you were a target.
So when I was a kid, we'd be sitting there watching a movie, all of a sudden the movie would go down, the light would come on, and you'd see these servicemen just canvassing. They'd go up and down the aisles, and you know, I didn't know what was going on. I was a little kid, you know, I was a young man. And so if they didn't see anything that looked like a zoot suiter, they would just leave. They didn't apologize or anything. And so taxi cabs would actually give these guys free rides from downtown LA to East LA looking for people to beat up. Surprising? It was a bitch to be a Mexicano.
He's a great photorealistic painter. I mean, just, whew, he's a prodigy.
For 25 years I've been working with all these artists, but I was never in a position to corral the necessary energy to propel a show like this on a museum level for the next 7 years.
It was my intention when we started this. I wouldn't put all this effort and work behind it if we didn't go into mainstream museums. This is the heralding and the acceptance of Chicano art in the mainstream. So my reasoning was that we should be going in the front door with the banners waving and trumpets blaring.
Once I knew about the project, and once Richard had basically sold me on working together with him, I kind of figured out what made sense for this project and how it might work best with corporate America.
Well, when I had a chance to look through the whole portfolio for the project, I learned a lot. Frankly, there are a lot of artists in here that I didn't know and didn't know their work. And so for me, it was an opportunity to learn some things and be very impressed by the legacy of the artwork that's been built up over time.
And we decided we wanted to bring on another partner, and Bank of America was a logical partner for farmers. They had business relationships, they had co-partnered on community efforts, and it was a natural.
As soon as I met Cheech, and as soon as I heard the passion and the interest that he had in this project, I was inspired.
Our philosophy for support for arts and culture is really one of, I guess, a sense of philanthropic obligation to give back in the communities where we do significant business.
Cheech is not only funny, but he's also very dedicated and very caring towards the Hispanic segment. He has been doing that for probably the majority of his life. And when I saw that kind of passion and that kind of care, I couldn't help but to say yes. There's no way in the world that anybody would say no to him.
The second, very easy, compelling reason for us to want to support this is the significant amount of money this project is going to raise for the Hispanic Scholarship Fund.
Thank you, farmers, to sponsor this project and so that we can give it away to universities so that the idea of Chicano art can be embedded in these collections so that it is now viewed as mainstream art and the contributions of Chicanos are seen as mainstream rather than a little side periphery finale that they only whip out every Cinco de Mayo.
And yeah.
Yeah.
This is the actual portfolio case of the Chicano collection project that we're working on. Each portfolio case is custom made. Now what's placed inside will be the 26 prints that are from 26 of the artists that Cheech Marin has selected from his personal collection. Now each one is signed and numbered by the artist, and it's a limited edition of 115, and each one is accounted for. 25 that go to the Hispanic Scholarship Fund, in which we'll raise funds for higher education. And there'll be 50 portfolios that will go to various museums and universities throughout the world. Basically, it's a time capsule. In between each of these prints that'll be placed in the portfolio, there'll be an inner leaf print, which will be silk screened, and it will have the bio of each artist, along with a woodcut print that was designed and printed by Artemio Rodriguez, and that'll be placed on each of the artist bios. And so that will be on top of the print, and those would separate each artist in there, and about the project, and about Modern Multiples, and our sponsors.
I believe there were close to 5,000 people who came to his exhibition. Almost all had never set foot in a museum before. The fact that it had Cheech's name on there, and everybody knows Cheech. Certainly every Latino knows Cheech. And he, and all of the art being Chicano, Latino, they were able to draw these many thousands into museum in Albuquerque.
I think it's going to reaffirm people that have been working in isolation in various parts of the Southwest going, well, I'm a Chicano, I'm a real painter, and there's no validation, and I think this traveling exhibition gives those people a belief and an extra boost to go, okay, this is valid, where I'm painting and what I'm painting is valid, and I will continue to be there.
And the thing is, at the end, what the Chicano school and Chicano painters and Chicano art do is they give this great gift to the nation. I mean, what they're giving is a beautiful school and a source of thought and a way of expressing their living and their culture better than you could, in what better way to do it than with pictures. And I wanted specifically paintings because that's kind of the highest level of acceptance in the museum world. You go to museums and you see paintings, you see sculpture, and there is Chicano sculptures, but just so happens these guys had a school of great painters and they could compete on a world level. They just weren't getting shelf space. It's all about shelf space.
The utopian thing is like, we're just next, we're just another, and we're included. And it's not a niche. It's not like Cheech has got to get funding to show us around the country. We're included, you know.
And I've met other painters that I've admired for years, the Texas painters. And this show has brought us together. And that's something that we've all felt. So this show is not about the dots, but connecting the dots. But the strength is the glue that we make between us.